Well, hello everybody, and I'd like to thank you for taking a few minutes to join us as we discuss the differences between research papers and research proposals. Both types of writing assignments are important to your academic program, and they are also key to the work of the historian. So when we focus on the concept of a paper versus a proposal, it is something that is very important to understand because you will be utilizing these two types of writing styles at various times within your career. Couple objectives that I've identified today for our time together is first to understand the differences between a research paper and a research proposal. You will focus on how to develop your work, and we will also identify the key elements of each writing assignment. Now, looking at objectives, we're also going to say what we're not going to do, and that's going to be focusing on topic selection. If you have any questions on the topic for either the paper or the proposal, I would definitely encourage you to visit with your instructor because they can assist you. And we're also not going to be largely focusing on grammar as well. We're going to be focusing on the overall ideas of the paper and the proposal. So as we begin, what is a history paper? Well, a paper is driven by arguments. Arguments require evidence. That evidence comes from your source material. So when we focus on these two ideas, we really have the basic concept of a history paper. The final element we want to focus on with the paper is to make sure that we're always looking at what the assignment is asking. You want to make sure that you're meeting those rubric requirements. And remember the importance of looking at the rubric to make sure that you are submitting everything that you are supposed to do. Research papers. In historiography, you focus on how the topic has been interpreted rather than the history of the event. So if we turn back to our reference to Andrew Jackson, for example, when we were discussing the differences between historiography and historical research methods, if you were focusing on Andrew Jackson within our overall research paper for historiography, you would not focus on Jackson the individual. Instead, you're going to focus on how Jackson's been interpreted. So again, in historiography, you're focusing on the interpretation of the event rather than the event itself. You're also going to briefly identify and analyze major historiographical trends. And you want to stick to page limits because remember, what is the assignment asking? It's very important to make sure you're very clear and you're very concise within your overall work. The format of a research paper is very similar to what we often see as it relates to your traditional writing assignment. For example, you're going to start with your introduction, in which you're going to introduce the overall topic to the reader, and then you're going to move to the thesis statement. In the thesis statement, you're going to explain how historical interpretations have changed over time, which is going to include things like a summary of the main points, and also what will the reader learn from your paper. You want to make sure that you're very clear in the focus of the overall work. The body of the research paper is the main component of that paper. And in this paper, you're going to have the main points that are going to include specific examples from sources. It's going to be included in Tarabi and Chicago citation style. You're going to compare and contrast interpretations. And you're also going to point out historiographic trends. What's very important in the body of the work is to focus on the fact that this is where you're making your argument. This is where you are presenting all of your evidence. The research paper will also include a conclusion. The conclusion is an important part of any writing assignment. It's important because it is your last chance to make that final impression on the reader. This is where you're going to recap your thesis. Ask yourselves as you're recapping the thesis, how does this analysis help us understand the historical topic better? And, very important, what should the reader take away from your paper? Remember, as I've said, this is the last chance you have with the reader, so it's also going to be your last chance to have an impact with the reader. That means it's going to be one of the last things they remember from your work. So, very important to have a conclusion in which you wrap your overall argument up. In a research paper, you will complete the research. That is a very important distinction to make with the paper, and it's also an element that makes the paper stand apart from the research proposal. As we shift to research proposals, we do want to keep in mind that they are written for many reasons, which can include both funding and research. This can come in many formats depending upon the course or the proposal requirements. When you're looking at developing a proposal, it will always have very defined formatting that you'll want to follow. That can be a 2 to 3 page topic introduction or a 12 to 15 page formal research proposal. In historical research methods, you will be focusing on the formal research proposal of 12 to 15 pages. And again, it's very important to be very clear and very concise within that 12 to 15 pages. So again, we do stick to those limits as well. In your research proposal, you're going to identify the hypothesis. When we talk about identifying a hypothesis, you're going to look at those methodologies to test that hypothesis. You're going to have a literature review, which is also looking at the historiography of the overall topic. And you're going to focus on why this project matters, which I always identify as the so what questions. Why is it worth your time to write the paper? And why is it worth your audience's time to read the paper? When we focus on those two questions, we are looking at the idea of the paper as it relates to the proposed research that you are making the case as being needed, which would be the step that would follow the completion of the research proposal. A couple key elements of the research proposal that I do want to highlight. You will not complete the research in the proposal. It's very, very important to know that you are making the case for why your research is needed and making the case for why your research differs. Primary sources are very, very important to the research proposal. When we focus on primary sources, we are looking at the foundation upon which your case that additional research is needed is built upon. The focus of your proposal will be on a topic in which you feel a gap currently exists in historical scholarship. That gap will be identified by you within your overall proposal, following your research on following research within the current secondary source material that you've identified related to your topic. Your research will fill the gap and you will explain both how and why it's needed. Finally, again, primary sources, very, very important to the research proposal. So if we take this concept of the research proposal and wrap it up, what we're looking at is you are making the case for research that is needed by identifying your source material, by identifying how that research should move forward and what it would look like. And your research proposal is the basis for the need for that research as you would move forward into that next step of writing the paper and completing the research. Do want to highlight the importance of the Chicago Turabian style. Turabian is a great resource, as we've talked about before, as it relates to formatting, but there's also several chapters that you can utilize as a resource. For example, in Chapter 5, you can plan your argument. Chapter 6, you can plan a first draft. Chapter 10, she covers introduction and conclusion. And Chapter 11, revising source sentences. A couple tips that I did want to highlight for proofreading, even though we're not generally focusing on the grammar aspect, there are some things that we can look at when we do proofread our work. First of all, does my thesis clearly state my argument? Number 2, does the main argument in each body paragraph support my thesis? Number 3, do I have enough evidence in each paragraph? Number 4, do I have unsupported generalizations? Number 4 is very important because when we do our writing, we want to make sure that we are focusing on providing evidence for everything that we state within the work. We want to make sure that we don't have opinions, and we do that by placing a focus on historical research. Number 5, does my writing reflect careful planning? Number 6, have I introduced, analyzed, and cited every quotation in Turabian format? A few basic grammar tips that I did want to reference. First of all, make sure you proofread your work. When we talk about proofreading, I always encourage students to actually read their work out loud so they can hear it. Speaking from experience on that idea and effectively utilizing that method, when we read our work out loud, it allows us to hear what we said and make sure that we have written what we intended to write. As the writer, we always know what we want to write, but we don't always effectively write what we have planned to write. Sentence structure, you want to make sure that you do focus on maintaining that appropriate structure and also look at your word usage, things like is, are, there. Those little mistakes that we can sometimes just make unknowingly. You also want to maintain the appropriate voice and avoid wordiness within your work. It's very important to be clear and concise in stating what you intend to state within your writing. With that said, I would like to thank you for attending. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact your instructor.